Particularly not so much about the Official Secrets Act in particular,
Yeah.
as about the way the whole British system works.
Well, sorry,
Is that
and me.
my great fear is that secrecy becomes the aim in itself.
You're talking to some scared little clerk who's terrified of his
Yes,
job.
exactly.
Well, all right. You
Yes.
how you going to fire all the scared little clerks?
But why
I remember
You
saying
think
that
that everybody,
scared as they
everybody
are.
at the level
I mean,
of the people
fear
you
is
said you're talking to.
tremendously
Why should he
corrosive,
be
and that is what this Act is going to build. Already people are terrified.
Why should he be frightened?
Because
They're
your
unconfident, they're
junior
scared.
officers-
And I think that leads to a very dangerous...
Frankly, this is absurd. Here is an act which is actually more liberal than the act which has been on the
In
statute
certain
book
areas,
since
yes,
1911.
I agree with you. In certain areas it is, but in others it isn't, and in my particular area it isn't.
But surely,
Defence
can I
is
just
one
put-
of the categories that I'm going to continue to have problems with, and I fear I'm probably going to have
Well,
more
journalists
problems.
are going to have
But could I
problems
put
anyway.
one point in? You see, Lord Dacre says this is a liberal act. Actually, it's an unworkable act that in order to make it workable has got to be tightened, and then they allow you to find out how many acres the Ministry of Defence have. But this is an act to tighten. I think Merlin Rees once said, we're going to get rid of the blunderbuss and go for an Armalite rifle, which was no doubt written for him by the security services, because I don't think he knew what was going on either. But the fact is that you have to ask yourself this basic question. We're talking about the national interest. In a democracy, the ultimate arbiters of the national interest are the voters. Once you start saying ministers, frightened little clerks, attorney general, secret service people are the best judge of the national interest, you have abandoned democracy. At that point, how serious the abandonment is may depend upon the issue. And I think the American, if I may pay a tribute, Oliver North committed a crime, was hauled before the Congress, brought before the courts for the crime he was alleged to have committed. I think he's been convicted and is appealing. Peter Wright committed a crime. They didn't try to bring him to justice, but to shut him up. Now, it's all very well saying Britain may be full of leaks, because if you're in the right circles, of course, people gossip. That is true within the British sort of feudal system. There's a lot of gossip among people who trust each other. But in terms of openness, the Americans are a model compared to us.
We're
I
not
think
as open as you think we are.
Oh.
Because there are many
No, but you're
cases
more
where
open
something
than
has to be
You're
done.
considerably
Well, we
Vice
have to do
President would
something. The
make
government has to do something that the general public can't possibly understand. I mean, a man who's a dentist is pulling teeth all day. A farmer is farming his lands or whatever. And you cannot get the general public to understand the subtleties of certain things we have in our conflict with the
That's the
Soviet
case for
Union.
Joe
They couldn't
Stalin.
possibly
That
understand.
is the case for Joe Stalin in a nutshell.
Yes, that's a
pardon?
very
That's the case
patronising
for
view
Joe
of the
Stalin.
problem.
I mean, you've
very
put the
Tremendously
Stalinist case with
patronising
absolute
view.
clarity that the Communist Party is the leading group in the Soviet Union, and you can't trust the public to decide who. Now you are,
certainly do
and you
jump
see
to
what you
conclusions
confirm
wonder
is what
whether,
I've long
that's
That's a
suspected.
terrible
You're very
view.
hard
You're
to follow.
You're an authoritarian. You don't believe the public have the common sense to decide. Now, democracy is based on the fact they make mistakes. They have the right to make mistakes. You say they shouldn't have any information
I
that
didn't
might
say that.
lead
I
them.
said they should be
Well, I
limited
think that's what
information.
you're saying. They shouldn't be allowed information that might lead them to argue that the government or the security services
take
made
the
mistakes.
place.
Well, now, wait a minute. Now, wait a
Or-
minute. This is very important, and I
take the
can't let
place
you
of
get away
God.
with that.
That's right.
Lord Dacre will remember that if during the war, if the general public in America had been simply, we'd taken a vote, do we go to war to help the British or not, the answer would have been a resounding no. We would never have gotten into World War II, and
Except
which
for
was
the Japanese at Pearl Harbor.
and how did we get Pearl Harbor? Yeah, exactly.
And they declared war on you. You didn't declare war on the
Right,
Germans or
but
the
you,
Japanese.
you don't think
try
that is an
one.
accident, do you? I mean, I chased around Washington all that time. We had Sir John Foster, we had a man called Intrepid, we had various others where we were trying to look into all sorts of things we could to excite the American people and convince them that this really was a danger, because the American people didn't give a damn. The only thing we could do to wake them up was have this Pearl Harbor thing, which did at least wake the people up on the West Coast and in Chicago, where the Chicago Tribune were all against it. But this was the smartest thing that Franklin Delano Roosevelt did, is to get us in the war. But otherwise, if it had been a popular move, we never would have done
That's a
it.
powerful case against democracy, and I accept it from you because I think it reflects the attitude of intelligence services everywhere.
You use this
can't
word
trust the
democracy
public
rather
to
loosely.
reach the right decision. I think that's what you're saying.
Lord Dacre.
Tony Benn goes on and on about democracy, but the point about secret services is, A, that we have to have them, and B, that they have to be secret. They are not democratic. Just as in an army, in the most democratic society, the army is a hierarchical institution.
That's not the point.
It is not the officers are not elected. Officers in an army, the generals are not elected. even in a democratic society, you require certain bodies which are not democratically organised, and secret services are one of them.
Are they
Now, but
accountable?
Lord Dacre, could I just ask you this one question? Because I accept what you say about the army, but the army doesn't decide who its enemies are. The army doesn't decide. No, just a minute. Let me finish the point. I may be wrong. Let me finish it. The army goes to war when the government and Parliament decides. But the security services go to war when they decide somebody is
Yes,
an
I
enemy of
absolutely
society.
agree with you
So
on
that
that.
really, if you were to say, put it on the same basis the Ministry of Defence, you'd know what they spent, how many there were, who the enemy were, what was the definition of an enemy, and there'd be an annual defence debate covering security. But you see, the security services are not like the army. That's one of my complaints. They have their own enemies. They decide if you're in CND, you're an enemy. If you're a trade union leader, you're an enemy. If you believe in socialism, you're an enemy.
You might
And,
be, you know.
well, I'm sure you think they're right about that.
It's worth examining as a possibility.
There are two separate points. And one is the structure of the secret services, and the other is its accountability. Now, I agree that it should be accountable. I agree with you absolutely that it should not be independent, dictating its own politics. It should be under orders. But the question is the nature of the link between, not between the secret services and the public. There should be no connection between the secret service and the public. They're secret. The connection is between the secret service and the government. It should be accountable to the government. But it should be accountable in such a way that the legislature, which is not allowed to know the details because the ministers will say, well, that's a matter of security which we don't discuss on the floor of the House. But I would like to see it accountable indirectly by having the ultimate authority outside party politics. And if there were a body which consisted of respectable people, respected by all sides, then it wouldn't be dependent on the government of the day. It wouldn't be insulated within itself, able to dictate politics. It wouldn't be subject to a particular party which happened to be in power, and it would be subject to the state, not to the government. But
what
it
is the
shouldn't be
difference?
subject to the people.
What is the difference? Because you see, you've said something, in my opinion, even more important now. You've said take the security services away from what you call party politics, which is actually the way the electorate decide how they're going to be governed. So you've now invented a new organ called the state, which I mean is in line with your view of lifelong confidentiality to the Crown or the state. But once you say that that is to be the case, then the definition of who the enemy are, what you can do to them, is exempt from public scrutiny. Now, you see, it so happens we do have exactly what you want. We have a state within a state that has a much clearer view of the enemy within, to quote the Prime Minister, than it does of the enemy outside. I personally don't think people have feared a Russian invasion for years, but they're very, very much afraid of things being said and done in Britain which they would regard as damaging to the status quo. And by saying you must take it out of the democratic arena, I honestly believe you're saying something as important as Mr. Copeland, who said that the public aren't entitled to know anyway because there's good reason for not telling you. Well, you did say that.
Technique of misquote. I didn't say they weren't
me,
entitled to know. I said the
Miles,
public
let
in
me-
most
let me-
cases don't want to know.
let me just come in here
Slaves
and
liked it
raise
too. We had a good
raise a
slave
slightly.
owner, you know, it's an old argument.
Let me raise, if I may, a slightly different question and sort of move us on a little. It seems to me that one of the things that we're addressing, that Lord Dacre was talking about and Tony Benn was talking about earlier on, the concept of a war in which the army is directed and so on and so forth, is the situation that perhaps we were in classically in, for example, the Second World War, and that since then we've moved towards wars which are very, very different. They're more covert, they're guerrilla wars and so on and so forth. Are the problems that we're now grappling with in the world of secrecy and the Official Secrets Act and how to control information and so on and so forth, are those questions which, in a sense, are specific to the time and the kinds of wars that are being fought in the world?
Absolutely.